University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
A very good morning, colleagues. I hope you are ready to rock and roll and to continue with the robust debates around technology and society in Africa after last night's parting. In this opening session, we shall be welcomed by Prof. Erica Krimambula, who holds a trilateral chair in innovation, the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Sustainable Development at the University of Johannesburg. And after a welcome, we shall get two keynote addresses from, namely Prof. Mpo Raborife, the Deputy Director of the Institute for Intelligent Systems at the University of Johannesburg, and also from Prof. Pearl Sithole, who is the Vice Principal Academic and Research at the University of the Free State. So welcome everyone. And I will now hand over to Prof. Erica Krimambula to welcome us. The floor is all yours, Prof. Krimambula. Thank you so much.
Should I stand or should I sit? I stand. Okay.
Whichever, yeah,
I'm not sure what works better for the online, but should I go here? Okay, in that case, let me just sit.
I just sit here.
Okay, good morning, everybody. It's thanks so much to the organizers for inviting me to welcome you as part of this conference. I hear that you've had very good deliberations and a very good meeting yesterday, and I'm sure today would be the same. I'll start by giving a little bit of an overview of what I think are the key issues in technology and society in the continent. As I was introduced, and thanks so much for the introduction, I'm part of a trilateral chair that pays attention to the role of innovation in connection particularly to science and technology in the continent, but understanding that innovation has sometimes an intended effect. So innovation is not always good for everybody because it's a disruption, right? It's a change in the way that we do things. So it's very important. Innovation has been driving development throughout our history as humans, right? From the beginning, we've been coming up with new ways of doing things. But as we come up with new ways of doing things, the new displaces the old. So some of those innovations may have detrimental effects to some of the communities. So it's important to be mindful of that, to be aware of that in order for innovation to lead to inclusion and a type of development that is inclusive. So that is a little bit what we are. This is primarily what we are concerned about. And in the context of our chair, but also the role of policy. How can policy ensure that the negative impacts of innovation are mitigated, and that the positive impacts of motivation of innovation are embraced, supported, and upscaled? So it takes us forward. In this context, I want to start by giving a sense of the Pan-African landscape of science, technology, and innovation, which is at the center of the continent's agenda for progress and transformation. Besides the national strategies that every country has to support the diffusion of knowledge and technology, there are various Pan-African strategies that are worth mentioning. In January 2013, the African Union adopted Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. And this is Africa's blueprint and a master plan for sustainable development and socio-economic transformation for the next 50 years. And this vision is anchored in a strong foundation of science, technology, and innovation. In 2014, the African Union also adopted the Science, Technology, and Innovation Strategy for Africa, STISA, which also calls on member states to accelerate Africa's transition to an innovation-led, knowledge-based economy, laying out the prerequisites, the pillars, the priority areas, and the investments to meet the necessary development in science and technology. On the global scene, we have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which also talks about transformation. And embedded in those goals is the importance of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, as well as building partnerships in science and technology at the global level. So we have this strategic focus at the African level. So how is Africa responding to this focus? What do we see in reality? So Africa has been generally portrayed as, in terms of its weaknesses, and that also includes the realm of science and technology. Despite its status as the second most populous continent, is home to about 17, nearly 20% perhaps of the global population. When we look at the conventional indicators of science and technology, such as investment in research and development, scientific publications, high-tech exports, and so on, Africa's performance is at the lower end when we compare ourselves with how other regions in the world are doing. For instance, in terms of the world regional shares of research and development expenditure, which is central, research and development is central for technology development, Africa represents a 0.8% it's a tiny fraction of the global efforts in R&D. Similar is the case with patents, which are below 1% of the total worldwide. Even more in Africa, most patents are filed by non-residents. So we have many European and North American and Asian residents applying for patents in the context of Africa rather than by residents. We'll find a similar picture if we look at scientific publications, high-tech exports, and other indicators, number of technicians, scientific personnel. I recently saw a world map representing the most innovative regions in the world, and Africa was practically absent in this map. As important as these rankings are, my view is that they tell us a biased narrative, a narrative that perhaps doesn't reflect the demographics of this continent and the productive structure of this continent. According to these figures, there's no innovation happening in the continent. But is that true? And if not, what types of innovation are taking place, and why are they not featuring in these global rankings of innovation and science and technology? I think this is a key question, it's a central aspect of our work, and I think as an academic community, it's our role to unveil and reveal the types of innovations that are actually happening in the continent, so we can better identify them, make them visible, and support them when needed. Perhaps it means thinking a little bit differently about how we want to capture innovation and technology dynamics happening in Africa. Perhaps this research and development driven, high-tech driven type of innovation is not what we find predominantly in the context of Africa. We know that we are in a continent of innovators. We see people solving problems every day to overcome different difficulties. We are in a continent of problem solvers, of people finding solutions in the context of scarcity. So it's important to apply the appropriate lens to identify the types of innovations that are happening in the continent and support them appropriately, so we can achieve the goals that we want to achieve. Actually, Africa's technology scene is booming. When we look at the number of tech hubs, there's over 700 tech hubs in the continent. There's been an exponential growth in the number of tech hubs. When you look at the dynamics, I mean, when we are comparing ourselves with the rest of the world, we get a picture. But when we zoom in and we see what is happening in the continent and how things are growing, we see a very different picture. We see a different picture in terms of growth, where many of these tech hubs could be close to what we understand as the traditional science parks and and incubators. But there's a new category of type of tech hub that is growing. And these are co-creation spaces. They receive different names: Fab Labs, maker spaces, and so on. But these are spaces where young people are sharing ideas, they are sharing the knowledge about technology, and they are driven by the principles of collaboration, peer-to-peer learning, and experimentation. And it's in these spaces where we're seeing some of these very interesting startups, and they are becoming a very interesting sort of platform for innovators to innovate. We see many of them utilizing mobile phone technologies, applying them to solve local problems, and it's a digital generation that has access to these advanced technologies. Most of them produced abroad, but they are applying them and utilizing them. As currently we are consumers of technology, let us accept that. We are consuming mostly technology that is not produced in the continent. Now the question is, how do we utilize that technology to apply it in a way that solves our own problems? And these digital innovators are doing quite a lot of that. There are very interesting examples of startups that are emerging from these places. For instance, there's the case of Ushahidi that started in Kenya, is now a tech leader in Africa, and he started in a co-creation space, providing a mobile platform for to report on election and monitoring and responses to crisis. Also, there are businesses providing tech-enabled solutions to prevent shack fires in South Africa, or other startups that are providing lights in crime-intensive residential areas based on motion detection technologies in Cameroon. There are many businesses that are also using 3D printers to provide low-cost medical solutions in the continent. So we see the emergence of promising new talent every day, self-made innovators, a wave of young, ambitious entrepreneurs who are changing the digital face of the continent in various sectors. This is inspiring, but how can it be supported? Because this is the key question. Many of these innovators are facing several constraints. They are working in spaces where internet connectivity is low, where there's unreliable power supply, where there's low access to finance, insufficient support to access new markets and upscale. So here's where the role of policy becomes essential. We have all of this talent emerging, young entrepreneurs that are utilizing digital technologies to solve local problems, but they're not able to upscale. How can it be supported? How can those innovations first made be visible, and second, be efficiently supported so they can grow? So I would like to conclude with a few reflections. First, as an academic community, I feel that we have a responsibility to reveal and make visible these innovations, the types of technology dynamics that are happening in our continent. That makes that in some cases may imply not looking only at those conventional indicators that are used to compare internationally, but looking actually to what is happening on the ground. So start by looking at what are people actually doing to solve local problems, utilizing technologies, looking at what the youth is happening, what communities are doing, what small startups are doing. Our innovators are operating in conditions of scarcity and often are coming from marginalized and vulnerable communities themselves. So they have a deep understanding of the social problems. They want to apply the knowledge and the skills in solving real problems on the ground. So new ideas from these constrained environments can provide very useful lessons, not only for Africa, but also for the world. Learning how to innovate frugally, making more with less is key for the future. And in this regard, there's a lot to learn from what is happening in the continent and homegrown African innovations to the rest of the world as well. As we're moving into a world where sustainability is essential, we have to think of low cost resource economic innovations are very much a lesson for the rest of the world. These innovations often adhere to the principles of openness, of circularity, of participation, of sharing knowledge, which I think are also essential for the rest of the world. And finally, when we look at the possibilities that homegrown African innovations bring to achieve the SDGs and the broader African developmental agenda, it is important to think about how do we ensure that these innovations are contributing to these broad Pan-African visions and objectives that we've set out for ourselves. So connecting innovation, in other words, to our developmental goals is essential. And we have to do that deliberately and systematically for it to happen. Our collective work serves to make African innovation more visible, to inform policy decisions in a way that leads to the future that we want to live, a more inclusive, environmentally sustainable reality for all. So that is what I wanted to start with. I think this, from what I hear, I think this resonates with some of the discussions that were had yesterday, how Africa sits in the global scene in terms of being a consumer or producer of technology. What does that mean in the current context of geopolitics? How can we perhaps take stock of what we're doing a little bit more effectively to make it grow and to make it respond to our needs and our realities? I think this is the key question, and I hope the discussions today will illuminate this a little bit. Thank you so much.
Many thanks for those very thoughtful, incisive, and eloquent welcoming remarks, Prof. Krimambula, which have reflected on our realities on the African continent in our interactions with technology, the 4R related cutting-edge technologies. Your very thoughtful remarks really make for food for thought for us as Africans in our interactions with these technologies, and as we try to map the way forward, which speaks to our lived realities, as you have just said. Colleagues, we will move on, and we shall be getting an opening address from Prof. Mpo Raborife, the Deputy Director of the Institute for Intelligent Systems. Welcome, Prof. Mpo. The floor is all yours.
Oh, the mic. Okay. Jumbelang Makaitsu. Good morning to everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the second day of the Tech and Society Conference. We are delighted to have you today, right? I would like to thank the speakers from yesterday and today for sharing their work and research with us. I would like to thank all the participants and everyone who's attended. This is really it was a very diverse crowd that we have. We had people from civil society, we had academics and scholars, we had students, and most pleasing, we had very young researchers presenting their work. And this speaks to this conference and the intention of it, which is tech and society. And having young research really speaks to what we, as Africa is. We are a very young continent. So it's good to see the future of the continent taking it in their strides and taking the future and conversations about the future of this continent forward. So thank you so much for having it. It is quite befitting that the Tech and Society Conference is at the University of Johannesburg, right? Because when we talk about tech and society, we talk about the role of technology in society and how it advances or even hampers the progress of people and how people can use tech to actually advance their means of production or the economy or how they actually get on with their way of life. And I'm saying it's befitting because we are the #1 university according to the Times ranking, basically on how we not only do impactful research, but how we are embedded in the society, and the research that we do speaks to the society within which we are in. And we are #2 in the continent. So it's befitting that we are leading the charge because we are the ones, according to the Times ranking that we are leaders in this, so we are supposed to be leading this. So thank you so much. And to those colleagues who are online, thank you so much for joining us. And just to open up today's session, I'll just give a brief tour. So today we will be having conversations on digital innovation and transformation. We have, discussions on the fourth industrial revolution and its impact live post-COVID, as we all know that COVID really put a loop and threw a spanner in the works for all of us and changed how we adopt technology. So at that point, we had no choice but to adapt and adopt. So we're going to talk about the trauma, probably, PTSD that we have after COVID and technology, the trauma that technology put on us. We're also going to talk about ethics. Now, ethics are important, right? For those who are trained in engineering and computer science know that our forefathers or our Grootmans in the field started, AI and the hypothesis that to pass to be called an artificial intelligence system, right? You need to be able to be indistinguishable from a human being. So when I interact with the system, I need not know whether this is a human being or a system. I need to be fooled. And this is what, one of our forefathers, Alan Turing, hypothesized and did the test on. And for a lot of time, this is where the computer science and engineering and AI as a field was heading towards, right? Now, the question that you will see conversations today is that, is this a question that we want to do? So when we talk about ethics, do we want to mimic human beings? Or do we want tech to solve problems? Should an airplane fly like birds and pigeons and convince pigeons that is one of them? Or can just a plane just fly and get to the destination and we still can regard it as an artificial intelligence system? So where are the limits of basically AI? How can we now measure if it's ethical or not? Is it ethical to teach robots to shoot? Right? It's a good tool to have during warfare, but is it good to actually, train them to shoot? And with what we have in terms of biases, human biases creeping into algorithms developed by human beings, which limits should we be looking into and when do we stop with these machines? And basically, how do we achieve AI on which the fourth industrial revolution is actually based on? Now, again, this is very much disciplinary, as you will see. We will talk about jobs, future jobs in Africa, what the future of Africa jobs looks like. And this is quite important because whether Africa likes it or not, we need to get onto the fourth industrial revolution. We are not the closed dark continent that we used to where we are part of the global world, and we need to be part of the global world in its entirety. And the global world has advanced in this revolution, and we have no choice but to get into it. Now, in closing, colleagues, I'd like to thank you for joining us for today again. This is an important conference, as I said, not only for academics and scholars to tick on our CVs and KPIs, but it's important for society, civil society. It's important for industry. As you did see, some of the presentation yesterday spoke to corporate and everyone who is part of our community and is affected by technology to form part of these conversations in order for us to be able to fully reorganize our society and prepare it for the future within technology. Thank you so much.
Many thanks, Prof. Mpo, for that passionate opening address. Your passion around 4IR-related technologies and their interactions with society is always infectious and inspiring. Colleagues, we shall now hear from our keynote speaker for this session, and that is Prof. Pearl Sithole, the Vice Principal Academic and Research at the University of the Free State. A very warm welcome, Prof. Pearl Sithole. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues. Chair, can I just check that I'm audible?
Very, very, very audible. We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I'm also going to be trying to share. I'm not sure whether I will be successful with this, but please also let me know if you can see my presentation.
We'll alert you in a bit. Yes, we can see your presentation, Prof.
Okay, all
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you very much, colleagues, for inviting me to this conference. I am really pleased to be part of it and to have been part of some of the sessions yesterday as well. I'm really grateful. I just wanted to say, Prof. Raborife, that indeed you can continue to brag. This conference, this gathering, this culmination of conversation, inviting colleagues from various disciplines and entities, is truly a prayer come true for some of us who have pondered on the politics of knowledge production for a while, and that we have been worried about the placement of Africa in particular in the space of knowledge production, and of which technology, the production of technology, is a part. This morning, as if I knew what Prof. Nkrima Mbula was going to say, I actually have a presentation. I'm hoping to share thoughts that engage a little bit with the space that she has just painted, especially about Africa and technology. The title of this has been evolving, and I'm sure it won't exactly please my sons, who sometimes complain that when they look at what I do and they are not part of this space, and then they look at what I do and say, "Mom, can you say all of these things in English?" And I'm saying that because actually one of the many challenges that we have is to be in gatherings like this and be able to cross-communicate as we set the agenda for Africa. So the title is Science, Innovation and Technology Without an Agenda, I allege, working with a capitalist diaspora and opportunistic loyalties. I hope that it does indicate that I have a couple of worries about the space that we are working from and are pegged in as a continent as we try to do science, innovation, and technology. The first point of departure, colleagues, that I want to put forward is that technology cannot be discussed outside of the broad context of national innovation system. And currently, especially for South Africa, the national innovation system is actually quite problematic. It is problematic, not only, we love to talk about a shortage of resources, but even if we were to be given resources, right now in the approach of the national innovation system, the framing of how we peg ourselves and what we do is problematic. I'm not going to even start with the history of that. I just want to latch into the most recent indicator of this from the National Advisory Council on Innovation that launched its report in July this year, just giving us the updated version of where we are. Very early in that report, even if you do not wish to feel depressed by all of the elements later on, they actually already claim and show that overall, South Africa's innovation performance remains stagnant. There is a decline in almost all facets of South African innovation system. South Africa is falling behind other middle-income countries in respect of key outputs such as patents and high technology exports, performing better in innovation inputs than innovation outputs. I've never seen a much more respectful way of telling us that actually there are inputs and how do you talk about the performance in inputs and lower outputs if you actually not telling us that we are consuming a lot of money and are producing nothing that is decent to that contribution by society. I don't think that we should be kind to ourselves as scientists, as knowledge producers, because actually we tend to resurrect community, we resurrect civil society and other stakeholders when we are in a crunch to account as to what it is that we are doing. And so the core argument that I want to put forward, and I'm taking this from another paper that I am currently writing in the field with more specific focus on publications, but the core argument that I'm putting in even for here is that I'm advancing an argument that knowledge production and knowledge management is the biggest Cold War scheme advanced by coloniality. If, as often lamented, there was empty political independence with economic gains, no economic gains for many who were colonized, at the core of that problem is the issue of knowledge production and the perpetual struggles related to intellectual patronage that we're experiencing. Indeed, this problem is not simply about who produced what. It is about the structural relationships that make some serve data to others so that the latter can hover over knowledge production permanently in order to validate the former. It is structural intellectual injustice formatted in relationships around publication and gatekeeping, mainstreamed carefully into the basic unit of knowledge production, the university. The universities are deeply colonially captured currently. Publications or publication networks, including publication houses, simply make the capturing run normatively and professionally. And we have to say this and exclude blaming society and or community, civil society about it, just looking at ourselves and what it is that we are doing for society. So what are these structural issues that I'm worried about that are plaguing the system of innovation and knowledge production? I want to whisk through them, colleagues, and I will not get time to detail some of the things, but I want to whisk through them so that when I make an argument of what bold steps we need to take, it is contextualized by this kind of frame we can take forward later through other writings, consulting other writings. The first thing is that the capitalist diaspora is producing users of technology. And I am not going to have also the time to articulate capitalist diaspora, but I hope that in putting those terms together, you can see what I mean by that in terms of the fact that not everyone who is in a particular space is serving that space. Some are actually serving specific interests. The capitalist diaspora prevents a discussion on patents and a more liberated way to build patents over others. So we are locked into a particular relationship, a particular scheme of patent framing globally that will keep us serving data towards others or just translating others to give them the colonial dividend that emanates from those particular patents. The intellectual property regime is extremely formatted, even at research participation level, So you are working within the system that you see in committees, even in universities, in the way that intellectual property is formatted, to a point where even though we pride ourselves to have been to communities, we only study them, and it would be better if we were actually studying the communities. We actually sometimes understudy them because we take from the communities to just go and fit into particular formats. And we do not necessarily take what is taught by that particular context, acknowledge it and so on, but then it makes scholarship different. It makes technology different to the context. The higher education system and African schemes of excellence, of science excellence, only promote fitting in. It is why I'm disappointed that my sister may not be here, Dr. Oboko, because I sometimes want to say these things with the practitioners that can debate them, who are somewhat at the helm of these particular schemes. The entire system is promoting a situation of fitting in, and this is why even nationally, internally in South Africa, excellence is not actually yielding something new. It is still aligning the ratings of universities, the ratings of people inside our community. You would actually think that other than the name changes, you are still in the old apartheid model. And people are not necessarily worried about this as they pant themselves as excellent in terms of why is it aligning so much with the old. Thus, the universities, including the so-called universities of technology, are importing research equipment from other countries. I mean, we are the hope for our society. We actually take a huge chunk of our budgets, and sometimes we stop and wait for things that we are importing from wherever. And we saw this during the floods in KZN when we were waiting for things from Germany to be imported so that we can fix certain things. Some of us at universities delayed fixing certain things because everything was going to KZN because we are in the queue. How is it possible with universities of technology? And why should society not say, what are you doing for us so that we also advance in different ways? If the generalization is uncomfortable, I will be happy to, now this thing is freezing. I will be happy to receive a huge chunk of alternatives and new things that have come up from us, though, not from the communities as such, as processing the stature of science and technology. Then there's the question of problematic loyalties, where we know, as such as it has happened during the pandemic, that and see and appreciate as stakeholders, global stakeholders, bring help to Africa. And in the sum total of analyzing all of it, you can see that actually this is about them creating extension sites for their patents. Industry sometimes also brings help, but industry has this kind of pomp that says that we will be party to this if the environment is enabling. They mean for them unapologetically. We haven't even started as a country or as a continent that has so many challenges to find a discourse that makes industry to grow but binds it to be loyal to the continent. A talk of a developmentalist economy. They actually, even local businesses will swear at their own governments at times for that enabling environment, without necessarily finding a win-win pressure to find a win-win solution for the mutual context. And so I'm not going to to go even to be conceptual about it. Suffice to say that at some point, story for another day, we need to find out what is it that we usually mean when we talk about Western science that is produced from this continent, and why does it continue to be Western science? This is a conceptual problem that is at the core of the formatted loyalties that we are in. It's also about the failure on our side to create typologies of knowledge, so that we create typologies of knowledge in order to see to what extent we are advancing in each type. Knowledge, I argue, it can at least at minimum be, and I'm not talking about disciplines, but I'm talking about knowledge ontology generally. It can be pragmatic and operational, which speaks to the utilitarian value of knowledge. It can be tried and tested, which means to the it begins to be converted into a heritage claim of sorts for that particular space. It can be conceptual and reflective, which speaks to the framing of knowledge, the giving ourselves the license to frame where we are going with knowledge and social justice issues, in fact. And so if you have a knowledge and a science system, an innovation system for any country or continent for that matter, that is not conscious on what it is doing in these typologies, and that is fitting in, as I allege, and that is translating for application, then you have a seriously deep problem in terms of an agenda, in terms of from whence do we go from here. And all of these three types of knowledge should be some kind of background check for any system that is conscious of the politics of knowledge production to check where it is going. I just want also to talk about, and there are many other writers who are now beginning to get into the space of a consciousness of the actual rating and ranking of schemes, the pronouncements of being good and best. And some of them, like the ones I cite here, argue that, you know, these rankings and ratings tend to produce previous formal and informal hierarchies. They use indicators and methods that are not only disputed, but also not appropriated, if not fallacious, in terms of weightings and some methods. Actually, I listened yesterday carefully when some discussion was done about plagiarism, and to some extent, I understand that there were specific, very pointed articulations to that. It wasn't a willy-nilly kind of discussion, but I still continue to have a little bit of disappointment on those discussions when they are not brave enough to talk about the sophistication of plagiarism, the plagiarism in conferences, the plagiarism we still talk about, because they're talking about weightings and some methods. We still talk about the percentage as given by Turnitin or set for that particular institution in terms of what is the plagiarism that is acceptable, or the citation that is acceptable. But there are specific things that we need to delve into, because I could give a student, for example, an instruction of 1 page in which to demonstrate that the involvement of women in science and technology has not been changing. And that student can choose to use the 1 page by citing 3 paragraphs from a number of over years, and then write a succinct 1 line at the end that says, actually, it is declining with more people in being filtrated in masses, but less in terms of scholarly integrity, whatever it is, that would have been a student that would have been active in demonstrating something. But anyway, I'm just digressing to talk about some of the nuances of the critique that you will find that some of the colleagues are really pushing around the ratings and rankings. And sometimes if you're doing that from a point of view of Africa, it is as if it's grapes are sour. No, there are very specific nuances that are being ignored in these kinds of debates. Hence, we are in a situation where we are applauding ourselves really annually for lack of change. Institutional ratings have largely shown results of alignment with the past, individual ratings showing alignment with the old racial and gendered hierarchies. And even if you will convince me, I try to convince me about the fact that citations, for example, are a very objective way of assessing someone. We will still have an argument about the citation of the work of Black women. We will have that argument. And the choices that writers make in terms of citation. The entire system has done very little to ascertain why the status quo remains, let alone delve into the substantive elements of what is excellence other than just go international. How many networks have you got in the global north and all of those things? With no allowance of change and brave departure from the familiar, we are in trouble, which is what is currently happening. So as I wrap up towards conclusion, which is really not a conclusion, but it is the hint as to probably what should bug us moving forward, and capitalizing on the fact that the University of Johannesburg is pulling us together like this to actually put these things on the table and reflect overall what must be done. Some of the things that I'm suggesting here are really having something to do with, first of all, being realistic. Of course, we are often accused as academics of diagnosing ad nauseum, but we can't fail to diagnose for us, for ourselves. And so we must first admit being at the lowest point as the national innovation system. As consumers of technology, that it's a trap that we are perpetually going to be located in unless we do something different. Second, we have to be diagnostic about why we are so scared. I mean, we really have to ask that question. And the indicators of fear in us, and I note the conversations around funding and all of these things, because we are also just trapped by those survivalist things. But the indicators of fear that we have is that we are actually trapped in a kind of protest existentialism. Go to conferences and we say these powerful things that are protesting, and it actually ends there. It actually does end there. So, and that protest existentialism then is met by rhetorical radicalism. Some of the radicalism comes from us. Some of it is a reaction by people who are not necessarily, don't necessarily have a problem with our entrapment, who also say the right things and not act on them. So that's the first thing that we should sort out and resolve in our heads, because if you don't become transparent with why you are fearful, then you won't actually strategize carefully around it. And then I'm suggesting 5 things that are the fundamentals that we need to sort out whilst we do the work, whilst we apply, whilst we do all of these other things, but they are fundamentals that should get us out of this ditch. And these are, first of all, we need to desist from existing to catch up. we are talking too much about Africa needing to catch up. Africa must not be left behind. In other words, we're giving this impression that we exist actually to do that, and that one day this mirage shall be caught. If we exist to catch up and not find proper ways of talking about what we need to do to catapult ourselves out of that ditch, then we won't pitch our science and technology contextually. In other words, even as we apply what we get from elsewhere, in the first instance, we have the obligation to apply it and honor the context, which some are actually doing. But sometimes you still hear these issues of material having been imported, but the software having to be constantly bought to maintain it, and or it lies in hospitals or everywhere else without being used because it wasn't fully thought through the process moving forward. We need to source as much as we can do ourselves and sort of do things for our context. The second thing is really to be conscious about the politics of science, technology, and innovation. And I really want to hint at what Prof. Krima Mbula said about openness and sharing and all of those very noble ideas that we should all subscribe to, but with caution. Because the politics of science, technology, and innovation is not innocent in other countries. It should not be innocent on our part. We should be really conscious of the competition and the agendas of others as we do this openness and sharing and all of those kinds of things. Otherwise, we get reduced to data and we get the plagiarism from our very conferences feeding outside and plotting for what next will solve our problems so that we can be sold technologies for our condition. We need to find spaces of caucus. All countries do have spaces of caucus. They don't only speak of these kinds of things at conferences. They go to conferences to see how they can translate that into their spaces of caucus. The equivalents of NRF, their equivalents of CSIR, and so on and so on, are safe spaces to then be able to say, how do we translate form the agenda and move, and it better not be a fitting in agenda, but form the agenda, zoom into specifics, and catapult the country out of its ditch. And give them space as well, those spaces of caucus, for a departure from over-formatting. One of the toughest elements of the resistance to decoloniality is actually those disciplines that have an ego, the disciplines of vigilance, which will come and tell you to come and account for rigid processes that you planned 5 years ago or even in an annual cycle, because you can't innovate. It is mounted as accountability, but sometimes it suffocates certain practitioners. And that's financial and legal mostly. And then, of course, as I wrap up and conclude, Jay, the fourth thing is really to be clear and tactful around the global and hegemonic nature of science bondage. Technology is a powerful diasporic hegemony mounted on pioneer patents. I was so sad when I saw our Minister of Economic Enterprises negotiating patents, the COVID thing, and coming back with a raw deal and marketing it to us as some kind of achievement. We have to craft relevant liberation strategies as scientists to assist the country to get out of this ditch. Being intentional about engaged scholarship that centralizes our context is essential as the last element, and it will give us the license to be disruptive in a way that actually ditches the agenda of fitting in and become really creative. That program director is my story, and I hope that it does cause discomfort. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pell, for that very thought-provoking and well-articulated keynote address. We really appreciate your reflections on our realities when it comes to our interactions with today's technologies. Colleagues, we still have a few minutes in this session, and I can now entertain a few comments and or questions from the floor on Prof. Pell's address. Yes, Prof. Sipamandla, we have a roving mic. Please hand it over to Prof. Sipamandla.
Yes, good morning, and good morning, and really grateful to our speakers this morning for getting us there thinking. Erica, I saw figures recently from the African Development Bank, and they kind of repeated themselves because I saw the same figures around 2016, that there was a massive increase in the number of tech startups, that people were starting tech startups in a very big way, and that Africa was really moving very fast in that. But that their lifespan was almost invariably in a big number, about a couple of months. So they were starting very fast and collapsing, starting very fast and collapsing. What is the implication of that to us? Because we do place a lot of emphasis on tech startup as the ways in which people disintegrate this concentrated system, mostly dominated by big multinationals and stuff, and then we put power in the hands of the ordinary person that has a gadget on the ground. Yesterday, there was a lot of debate and discussion around the idea of leapfrogging, that technologies may enable Africa to leapfrog. And all that. I would like to hear what your perspective on this idea of leapfrogging as a purpose, as a motive for us to engage in innovation. Other speakers may take up that one too, definitely. In this particular case, Erica, what do we mean by sustainability when we're talking about innovation and this area and all that? Are we talking about sustainability in the sense that we take up technology in a manner that is ethical, that is ecologically relevant, that doesn't denude the environment, or we mean sustainability in a financial, economic sense, that we can maintain what we start or whatever it is? Professor Sichole, lots of thoughts triggered in all of this. Now, you make that point about us being trapped in a system where we provide data that is meant to validate concepts, theories, assumptions from elsewhere. How do we propose, even in very small legal ways, in the course of a master's dissertation or and stuff like that, that we invert that, so we do not get caught up in what Pauline Ontonji calls extraversion, where we export data and export theories. Because the common thing, many people who use data from Africa to prove that the point made by some big scholar was true or not true. It's the easiest way of doing research, but it's problematic as you indicate. Now, lastly, with regards to this idea of finding convivial spaces where we could escape formatting, how would you propose? I mean, for many people who are here are young and upcoming scholars, are subject to all manner of things, including us professors, who sometimes operate as on behalf of the system, to put them into spaces, not the one they desire, but the one we want. How do you propose we find those convivial spaces, even if they're not fully convivial? But how do we begin that process of finding those convivial spaces? Aren't conferences a form of that? Aren't seminars a form of that? Aren't research networks a form of that? Or we need something a little different? Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Prof. Sipamandla. So we've received a couple of questions for both speakers, for both Prof. Erica and Prof. Pell, and I will now afford Prof. Erica to respond to the couple of questions which we have had from Prof. Sipamandla, and after that we'll hear from Prof. Sitole.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for the good questions. I'm sure the other speakers are also in a very good position to comment as well, but I'll give my short views on that. The three of them are very, very pertinent questions, and they probably require a much longer discussion than the time that we have here. But you started off by pointing out that there are many startups, but they have a very low survival rate, which speaks again to the point of, we have high levels of ingenuity and entrepreneurship. So when we are characterized in the continent by low innovation and low entrepreneurship, it may be a mischaracterization when we see the fast growth in startups, particularly digital startups. Now, when we don't see them surviving, is that an issue with low innovation or with our ability to create conducive ecosystems that support those innovative startups to survive and to be sustained over time? I think that becomes a policy issue. It becomes when you talk to many of these startups and entrepreneurs, and we've done several surveys on the ground to micro enterprises, to small businesses, and in different sectors. And one of the questions that we consistently ask is, what are your barriers or obstacles to innovate or to grow? And it inevitably always comes back to access to finance and conducive infrastructure. So in terms of the unreliability of power and digital infrastructure and internet becomes an obstacle, as well as being connected to the broader innovation system. And the earlier presentation has talked about the innovation system. When we think about these enterprises in isolation without the system around them, we're missing a big part of the picture, because innovators don't exist on their own. They are part of an ecosystem of organizations, including education institutions, training institutions, financial institutions, in many cases communities and community organizations and NGOs, government organizations, and all of those are in one way or another becoming sources of knowledge and information, sources of finance, sources of skills, access to new markets, and all of those need to be mobilized for that ecosystem to be conducive and provide a growing ground for these seeds, which are the startups, to grow. Right. So when we think about innovation, we need to think about the innovation system, not only about, if you throw a seed in an unfertile ground, it won't grow. And that is what is happening with the startups. It's not because we are lacking seeds, it's because the ground in which they are, the ecosystem, is not conducive for them to grow. So that becomes a space where it's providing us very clear entry points for policy intervention to support those interactions, those connections, to make the fabric of our innovation systems more supportive of those startups. So that would be my response to your first question. Your second question is about leapfrogging. Is leapfrogging possible? Is it desirable? I really like the earlier presentation, which was cautioning us against this constant narrative of catching up. It's important to compare ourselves with the trajectory of countries that have done very well in the past. But there's a saying that, you can't swim twice in the same river. The water is change. It's always changing. So we need to, this narrative of catching up puts us in a situation where it makes us think about there's a fixed line and there is a fixed recipe to advance in that line. And we know that that is not the case, because that's it's the same as picturing a stagnant river. That is not the case. We know that there's a flow, the sectors change, the conditions change, even the international regulations change. So there's a very interesting economist that that talks about Hajun Chan, that talks about kicking away the ladder. It's very interesting because when you see the ladder that some of the advanced countries, mature economies have used to climb up the ladder, that ladder doesn't exist anymore. So we need to find new ladders to climb up. Even, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and the types of regulations that these countries were guided to advance in their economies, those regulations have changed over time. So we're not in the same environment. We're not in the same context. The challenges are different. The opportunities are different. The sectors that we can utilize for our own development are different. So I think the narrative of catching up in some cases is decontextualized and ahistorical. So let us look at what is happening now. Let us assess what the opportunities are now, and let us contextualize what a development path is for us. And that may take us to a space of leapfrogging, where I don't think the objective should be leapfrogging, but rather contextualizing the opportunities, and that may take us to a place where we are leapfrogging. But it may take us to follow similar paths that other countries have followed. But it's about contextualization. What does it make sense in this moment now for us? We know that it's possible because in the context of finance, we've seen mobile money, for instance, in East Africa, sort of overriding the formal banking system. That is leapfrogging. That is a way of moving, like sort of not going through. We've done that with mobile telephony. We didn't go through the step where we had everybody having fixed lines, and then we went into the mobile phones, right? We skipped that step and we moved straight into cell phones. And now we have a huge penetration of mobile telephony in the continent, right? Without having gone through the stage of fixed line installation in the continent. So we know that it's possible to leapfrog in technologies. We've done it. We're doing it. But it's a matter of, it's happening in cases where we have been able to seize the opportunities of the moment. So if we do that deliberately and systematically, I believe that we'll get to that point in many technological spaces. Now you're asking what is sustainability, whether it has to do with inclusion or it has to do with environment. The UN Sustainable Development Goals define sustainability by both. So you cannot achieve environmental sustainability without inclusion, and you cannot think, it's the two sides of the same coin, essentially. You can't think about a sustainable solution that is not grounded on inclusion, and you can't think of an environmentally sustainable inclusion to a sustainable inclusion that is not grounded on environmental sustainability, because we have limited resources in this planet, and we have some planetary boundaries that we have to adhere to. So it's the two. The two are connected, and they are the two sides of the same coin, I would say. I'll pass it
Fantastic, Prof. Erica. I will now allow Prof. Pell to respond to Prof. Spamandla's questions. Prof. Pell, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Program Director. If I'm overwhelmed, Prof. Zondi, it is because I know how the questions that you ask hint to a lot of work where we are. There is no uniform solution for all, but because you also used, when you were asking the question about how we become data providers, and you're saying how can we direct a master's student to think in a way that empowers them to be much more innovative and scholarly. It is one space where we start. The poverty of what is being produced now in the massification of postgraduate studies, for example, is exactly that. You feel depressed as an examiner with the pattern of introduction, research, data analysis, conclusion, and seeing the theories that are used and apply. It's there, and we pass people every day. We do not ask basic questions around what is new about this that is coming out of your work. That question is now lost. And with the loss of that question, we have lost the passion to generate new knowledge as even emanating from students. So we need to think very critically about that at institutional level, but we also need to think very critically about it as we board those planes and go overseas to exchange, in terms of what is the equality of that exchange? If by an exchange and me being placed as a scholar elsewhere, I am able to be followed by a couple of dissertations to examine for that particular institution in Europe, and I want people to declare at some point, maybe I'll do a research on this, as to how frequent do they actually examine things from elsewhere? How frequent do these journals that we all want to publish at, to what extent do they make us peer reviewers? Then we are, colleagues, we have to be frank that we are being we are a nice partner to have in order to be exploited in ways that may not necessarily be transparent in one conference. The second issue that I wanted to, your second question actually about escaping formatting. Again, it's a space where each scenario needs to reflect about how do we escape formatting. In the first place, do we agree that we are being formatted? Once that kind of admission or sort of assessment that says no, we're not, is done, we are on the right track. But if we are, and we see elements of being formatted in excellence, then we really have to start from asking what would be excellent that we want to generate. I just want to hint, because of time, at the concept of engaged scholarship. And this is the work that I want to do myself. Who does engaged scholarship elsewhere in other parts of the country? We are talking about engaged scholarship here because we see that our scholarship has not actually been generated from here. Now the emphasis is that let us be much more engaged with scholarship. Everyone else is probably generating scholarship for us to consume, and they are engaging with a whole range of stuff in the name of scholarship, full stop. So we need to be critical, even as we use this term. I'm not saying that we must throw it out of the window, but I'm then saying once if it empowers us to be conscious that we have not been independent, then let us now start taking stock as to what is it that we are now doing. And I'm using the term of engaged scholarship because I want to see what the NRF is doing about it. Is it dignifying it? Is it part of rateable things that we can do? Do we have a pool of people that can actually rate us as we generate this kind of knowledge? I feel sometimes there is a couple of people who are producing marvelous work, but because there is no one who is ready for that groundbreaking kind of thing, that interaction with society, that is actually saying, I'm getting something new from society, we are shunning that kind of scholarship. I have a whole range of ways to respond to this particular second question about formatting. But one, as one of the things that we should really do is to make resources follow an agenda. Because right now, we're doing a lot of things because there are resources to it. We have not set the agenda for Africa to actually innovate. Thank you.
Great stuff, Prof. Pell. I think I can squeeze in one last round of questions or comments from the floor before we take a break. Colleagues, may you kindly identify yourself before you give your contribution?
Yes, colleague. My name is Isaac Kambule. I'm a senior research associate in the Department of Politics and International Relations here at the University of Johannesburg. My two of my questions are directed at Professor Krimambula and as well as Professor Stolle. And I'll start with Professor Stoller. I mean, you made an important point whereby you said we are engaging in science and technology without an agenda. And that's very powerful because we are in the African context. And whenever we speak about science and technology, and again, it also linked to what Professor Krimambula was focusing on in terms of leapfrogging. We are in a global economy that is mainly driven by innovation. But one of the particular problems that we may face is us wanting to leapfrog or catching up with certain countries, whereas we are adopting technology that is not going to address South Africa's or Africa's current socio-economic challenges. So, for example, in as much as we can talk about some of the innovations that we've made, I can make one particular example. If you look at the digital economy that we're going to, slowly, the issue of money that we carry on our pockets on a daily basis is being eradicated. But we have a high number of Africans that are in the informal economy. What have we done to say we are also moving the informal economy into the digital economy? Countries such as Kenya have done quite well. But that particular model has not been replicated in South Africa and many other African countries. And we saw during COVID as to the number of people that were in the informal economy that were suffering. And that is mainly because in adopting technologies, we adopt them without necessarily focusing on how these technologies are going to address some of our structural challenges. And second to that again, it's the issue of science without science and technology without agenda. In this particular case, who do we say becomes the main driver of that agenda if the state in Africa has divorced itself in terms of driving the kind of innovation that we need? And we see with states such as your South Korea, they are where they are today because the state has been the main driver of that science and technology. During COVID, they did not have to wait for the West to develop certain measures or certain innovations to track COVID cases. They developed their own. And in Africa, we had to wait for innovations that were coming elsewhere. So my question then is, how do we then engage the state to play a primary role in terms of leading the kind of agenda that needs to be identified in terms of addressing the core issues in Africa? Thank you.
Many thanks for your questions. I see the, okay.
Yes, morning. Tinashe, I'm an intern by IPATC. My question is to Prof. Erica. I want to hear your comments or in terms of lessons that could be drawn perhaps from when you talk about innovation, especially from Silicon Valley, and because that's something that even China, they have their own Silicon Valley in this instance, and we always talk about having policies, and I'd want to hear from you what kind of policy, not in a vague sense to say we need policies, what should it look like, perhaps the empirical indicators from the perspective of government, in terms of having sustainable, a system that is sustainable, that sustains innovation in terms of having tech hubs. Yeah.
Thanks, Tinashe. I think we have a question at the back. Yes. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Yes, my question is...
Kindly introduce yourself first.
My name is Blessing Mbalaka. I'm a junior research intern at the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. I have a question which regards to, this whole notion of banking the unbanked. You guys are speaking of this notion as though it is an example of leapfrogging. But I look at it more from a more critical perspective by looking at, for example, how certain African companies become captured by transnational corporations. If we look at M-Pesa, for example, because I've heard reference to M-Pesa with regards to, in the context of Kenya, the ownership of M-Pesa is Vodafone, which is located in the United Kingdom. So I feel that is a contradiction. So yes, African companies can innovate and create solutions, but there has to be, there still is a threat. Transnational corporations can capture this innovative technology, and in that sense, our innovation can still be exported. I just wanted to make a comment on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Blessing. Profs Pearl and Erica. Sorry? No. Oh, is it? Oh, there are none. No, none. We don't have any. So Profs Pal and Erica. Sorry? Oh, there's one more. Okay, sure. Please go ahead. Go for it.
Good day, colleagues. My name is Portia Buthelezi, and I'm a senior lecturer at the University of South Africa in the School of Computing. My question is to Prof. Sithole. Prof, you spoke about the capitalist diaspora and how ratings are seen as excellence. And my question is, how do we foster innovation through collaborative spaces between universities, through multi, inter, and transdisciplinary activities, and across disciplines and in between universities? Because in my perspective, I've seen that universities are mostly working in silos, and maybe that is encouraged by the ratings as sort of token points for excellence, and they are competing against each other rather than working together. So how do we foster innovation through collaboration and not competition amongst each other? Thank you.
Many thanks for that very concise question. So Profs Pell and Erica, we are fast running out of time, so I'll give each of you a maximum of 5 minutes to respond to the questions that have been raised from the floor. So possibly we can start with Prof Pell. Prof Pell, you can go for it.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Maybe I'll start with Kambule's question on science. Comment actually on science without an agenda, and all of this question of even leapfrogging. I just think that we whilst we do not want to punish ourselves too much for being in the space and doing what we can to be here, we must be clear what is happening where. And leapfrogging use should remain separate in our head from leapfrogging innovation. I'm just going to end it there when it comes to that, because then it will set the agenda of what it is that we're actually doing and why it is some of the leapfrogging of use is actually necessary, because we have a very grumpy society out there. We have, in some instances, people who go to ATMs and ask a security guard to help them because banks do not want to serve them inside, and their level of technology is such that they genuinely want assistance with at the ATM. And here we are leapfrogging this and that in terms of EFT and paperless money and so on. So we need to be conscious of context and variate on the one side, and we need to be clear what pressure we're putting ourselves to innovate for our context. The other question about the state being divorced from all of this because and other countries being served by their states in terms of the agenda, that is exactly correct. I will not just add anything to that diagnosis. But we are also liable in there because we're not actually talking to other disciplines. If the last speaker was talking about trans and multi and even speaking in between disciplines, there are disciplines that were put at a vigilance level in a devious way by coloniality that says that thou shalt not speak to anything that is framed by the Auditor General, because if you challenge that, you are seen as challenging accountability, when it's not always about accountability. In other words, colleagues, I'm saying this is not just the problem at science and innovation as a silo. It actually goes all the way to even the public space, the management space, where some professionals who are no crooks at all will be gagged in order to innovate for the context because there is an Auditor General or because there is a certain way of interpreting legality that prevents them from being versatile. So we're faced with those kinds of things. Blessing Balaga, I cannot agree with you more. In fact, I actually enjoyed your paper as well yesterday. But on the question of M-Pesa Vodafone thing, it speaks to how I ended my presentation towards the end, about the fact that we need to be suspicious of the diasporic hegemony that is actually mounting itself on previous patents. And then translation and extension into Africa becomes just some other version of tailor-making things for Africa and the gain for the original patents. And just to do justice to Portia Buthelezi, I just wanted to say, because I hint at you at other responses, but I just wanted to say, if we gave NRF the liberty to design an excellence system for the country that not only speaks to how good you are at UniZulu, how good you are at UFS and or Pretoria and rate you, but that also, because they see that we have to dismantle the old systems of how we pegged the institutions, they actually encourage collaborations and are rating collaborations on the side, and the new generation with new ways of identifying substantive excellence, then we would go forward, because then we would have hubs that would be innovating for moving forward the country. Colleagues, I'm sure that I've done injustice to some of you, but apologies. I'm also kind of mindful of time. Thank you.
Past response. Prof. Erica.
Okay, thank you. I will be very quick. Thanks again for this round of comments. From the first comment, I will take that mention to the informal economy, which is absent of considerations when it comes to technology and innovation policies. This is an area that is very it's very close to my area of research. I've written quite a lot about innovation in the informal economy, how it happens. We've done surveys and data collection on that subject, and I think it's essential. And it becomes one of the arguments that I was mentioning earlier, how innovations that are actually happening on the ground remain invisible in the African innovation landscape. So that's a point well taken. There was also a mention to what sorts of policies are needed to sustain incubators or a Silicon Valley type in Africa. I think it's a combination, and there's a whole literature that talks about the types of policy mixes that are needed. So there's not one magic bullet, unfortunately, that helps with that, but it's usually a combination, a policy mix, where you have to produce, as I mentioned earlier, the conditions for a suitable innovation and thriving innovation ecosystem. So it's not only about supporting entrepreneurs, but it's supporting the whole constellation of actors and organizations that provide inputs to those entrepreneurs. So that involves, as I said, interventions that target financial institutions, training and education organizations, and so on and so forth. So it's supporting ecosystems that what needs to happen from a policy perspective, supporting innovation systems. There was a last comment around leapfrogging and M-Pesa as an example, or as a bad example because of issues of ownership. There's a whole literature on M-Pesa, and the complexities of M-Pesa have been extensively written about. The two examples that I provided are sort of like the usual examples in the literature of leapfrogging in Africa, which has to do with mobile money and cell phones. We didn't invent either of those. So we also didn't invent cell phones, but it becomes a leapfrogging example because it's about, I mean, the definition of leapfrogging is about skipping technological stages. And we did that by using technologies that were developed by others. So that doesn't exclude it from being an example of leapfrogging. Now, when we talk about ownership, that's another discussion. How do we build long-term technological capabilities to not be only users of technology, but also producers of technology. And that requires a whole set of efforts to build long-term technological capabilities. So I agree that is lacking in the continent, and we need to focus on that as well. But the reality is that up to now we've been technology users primarily, and we have managed in some cases, in some examples, to use that in a way that has allowed us to leapfrog. So that is where these examples come from. But the issue of ownership is very important, and I agree with you. Yes, I will conclude with that. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Prof. Erica. So, colleagues, thank you very much. And at this juncture, I think I can now close this opening session because we have run out of time. I want to thank our Profs Erica, Mpo, and Pearl for those very powerful presentations which managed to generate a robust discussion. Great stuff. I think our presenters deserve another round of applause.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.